So a few years ago, without any money, we made 5 short films. And then when we put them on Amazon Prime, they got hundreds of thousands of views. I wanted to tell you about that in this video because I think it was pretty cool and you maybe want to make some short films yourself. So you might find this inspiring. Thing is that when I started making films as a kid, all I had was this little clockwork 8mm cine camera, and it actually had these kind of 3 lenses on the front, so you could just switch them around to adjust the focal length. But you know, you got a roll of film, and it took ages to sort of get it into place and everything, and then it lasted 4 minutes, and then you had to send it away to be processed, and even that took like a couple of weeks. And you know, don't talk about editing this stuff together. You had to kind of stick it together with bits of glue, which was really unreliable and took ages. So the whole process was kind of slow, and there wasn't even any sound on the camera. But you know, this is basically how films were made for about 100 years. But these days, making a movie is so much easier. Even the cameras that we have in our smartphones are on a different level. You can shoot and you can edit a movie right on your smartphone in about 15 minutes. My point is that if you don't have any money for a camera, but you do have a smartphone, then use your smartphone, which is exactly what we did when we made our 5 short films. But look, you know, while you can make a short film with literally 0 money, you can also spend some money. I'm not talking about tens of thousands, but maybe like $50 or $100 or $500. So this isn't really a kind of challenge video. This is just me showing you how to make a movie for very little money. And this is something that I've achieved myself many times. What I'm talking about here is that you don't have to hire a lighting rig or a professional camera and cinema lenses and a big truck to carry it all in. So when I posted about my book the other day, you know, how to make a short film with a smartphone, someone commented that it's kind of a waste of time making a short because you can't get distribution. But I kind of disagree with that. I'd say that these days there are more reasons than ever to make short films. So, you know, let's quickly go through them. So the most obvious one is that you want to learn and you want to practice. So if you have no filmmaking experience, then I really don't advise you to start with making a feature-length film. Shorts let you learn all the filmmaking basics faster and without the kind of huge commitment that it takes to make a feature film. And of course, many very successful filmmakers started out by making short films. So this argument that you can't get distribution for your short film doesn't actually hold up because guess which streaming platform has by far the biggest reach worldwide? Of course, it's YouTube. So in terms of TV viewership, especially in markets like the US and the UK, YouTube is now the #1 platform, and it's even bigger than Netflix. My filmmaker friend, Marcus Marku, he made a short called 2 Strangers Who Meet 5 Times, and he put it on YouTube, and it now has 4 million views. So there's a Netflix movie called Cargo, and it stars Martin Freeman, and that actually started out as a short film, also released on YouTube. So I was working with a friend at the time who works for the company that produced Cargo, and they told me that they literally calculated whether it was worth producing Cargo by counting the views on the YouTube short. There's also the short film Lights Out, which was put onto YouTube, and that went viral, and it racked up more than 20 million views across platforms like Vimeo and YouTube, I think even more than that now. And that eventually led to a feature film deal with New Line Warner Brothers. So did you know that short films can actually win Oscars? And actually in 2025, the Dutch short film, I'm Not a Robot, won the Academy Award for Best Short Film. And that now has 1.8 million views on YouTube. You can also make a short and you can send it to festivals. And if you win an award, that's going to open doors for you, or at least it's going to make it more likely. The other thing is that shorts are a really great way to meet collaborators such as actors, crew, and even producers. And if they like what you do and they like working with you, they might want to join you again on a bigger project. And this actually happened to me. I made a short film in 2009 called The Late George Waterloo. And some of the cast and crew from that project then joined me again when I shot my feature film the next year. And of course, making that short gave me the confidence to make that feature film. So another reason to make a short is as a proof of concept. And you can then use this proof of concept for raising money for a feature or a TV series. So one really famous example is the movie Whiplash, which actually started out as a short film and then ended up launching the career of the director Damien Chazelle. And there's other filmmakers like Neil Blomkamp and Jennifer Kent. These directors turned their showcase shorts into hit movies as well. And this is just a few examples. Obviously there's many others. Okay, so I could go on about all this, but I think I've made my case basically. So let's talk about how to make a short film for peanuts. Now, when you want to make a short film with no money, you might think it's all about getting cheap equipment and volunteers for your crew, but in fact, the key to keeping the budget at zero starts before all that, and it actually starts with the story. So if you want to make a movie without spending any money, then you need to make it using whatever you have access to for free. If you've already got some people who want to make a movie with you, then just get together and you can discuss what you can all bring to the table. So the key element here is really locations. So just have everyone put forward the locations that they have access to, and make sure that they're confident that filming there is going to be fine, and then just make a list of all these locations. Now everyone thinks that cinematic is things like shutter speed and color grading and shooting in log and stuff. Now those things are important, but they're not actually as important as a cinematic location. So if you can, avoid locations which are outside in direct bright sunshine. So this is actually a location where we shot a little sequence recently with my friend Scott by the River Thames, and it was raining, so there wasn't any bright sunlight. And we had these old wooden jetties that look really cool when the tide is out. And then you can just film around them and under them, and it's like completely free of charge. There's these kind of interesting looking green walls that we could have used as a background. And then there's the London cityscape as well, which of course looks really cool. And of course it's completely free. And it just makes getting interesting shots much easier. When we filmed under the jetty, we got this beautiful side lighting on Scott's face. And this is the kind of lighting a cinematographer would actually create using lights. But we got this cinematic lighting for free, and it's just with the available sunlight. The more locations that you use for your story, the more money it's going to cost. Even if the locations are free to use, it's going to cost you time and money traveling between them. So I'm not saying don't use multiple locations, but it's something to bear in mind when you're writing your script. And if this is your first ever movie, then why not just keep it simple and use one location? There's a legendary low-budget feature film called Clerks, and that was filmed inside the actual convenience store where the film's director, Kevin Smith, worked. And because they had to film at night when the store was closed, that meant that the shutters were down. So how was this going to make sense in this movie when it was supposed to be day? So to make it work, Smith actually wrote into the script that the shutters were jammed. And so that's like the perfect example of how the script was shaped to fit their free location. So once you've got your list of locations, you can reach out to your friends, your family, and your colleagues, especially anybody who loves performing. And again, just make a list of everyone who wants to be in your movie. So now you've got your list of places and you've got your list of potential cast members. What you've got to do is come up with a story that fits them. Now, it could take place in just one location with one actor, or you could use several spots and a small group. It's totally up to you and your budget. Like I say, the smaller you keep everything, the cheaper it's going to be to film and easier. Now at this point, start thinking about your props and your costumes and any visual details that you already have access to. And remember, you don't always need the perfect prop because you can, make one or you can tweak something that you already own. There's one example in my zero budget feature film Third Contact where I needed this wooden box as a prop. So I just went out and I found this cheap wooden box, it cost like $10 or something. And then I used a soldering iron to burn in this sort of unique pattern into it. And it just makes it look more interesting and more mysterious. So I've actually made an entire video about writing a short screenplay and I'll link that in the description so you can watch that. But here I'll just give you a few quick pointers for you to consider. So it might help you if you start off by choosing a genre. When we're trying to think of stories, the options can often seem endless and you might just sort of go around in a circle. You can't really decide what sort of story you want to make. But by choosing a genre, it narrows things down and it allows you to focus on a particular type of story. So take that short that I told you about, Lights Out, which is in the horror genre. And the idea is really simple, and there's only one location and only one actor, so that makes it much easier to film. And by choosing horror, you know that your story has to scare people. Again, that just narrows your options. Now, rather than writing something like, a woman is haunted by a demon that only appears when the light is on, you can make it into a question and you can write something like, can a woman escape the demon that appears when the light is on? All stories are questions that are usually answered by the end of the movie. So here's a couple of famous examples. Will a Jedi Knight defeat the evil galactic empire? Will two lovers survive the sinking of the Titanic? And I think you can guess the movies I'm talking about here. You see, when you make your idea into a question, it kind of suggests a story. For theatre, we have stage plays, and for movies and TV, we have screenplays. And your screenplay needs to contain 3 basic elements: location, action, and dialogue. Location is where the scene takes place, and this includes whether it is an interior or an exterior location, as well as whether it takes place during the day or during the night. So, for example, exterior, River Thames, shore, and day. Action is just what the people in the scene do. So, for example, Scott walks along the shore towards an old wooden jetty. And dialogue is obviously what the characters say to each other, and it needs to be formatted in a specific way. Before you actually start typing away, writing your screenplay, it is worth sketching out your story structure as a series of story beats. So what are story beats? Well, they are actually key moments or turning points in your drama. So when I was making my short film series, before I wrote the script, I would write out these story beats, in about 10 lines, and each line described a pivotal plot moment. And if you just invest like a couple of hours in this step, you can save yourself days of rewriting the script later. So once you're happy with the basic structure, then you can start writing the actual screenplay. So of course it is possible to use a regular text editor to write your screenplay, but I do find that using screenwriting software does make your life much easier, basically because it automatically formats your script the correct way. So the general rule of screenwriting is that 1 page of script turns out as roughly 1 minute of film. So if you had a 15-page script, it should come out at roughly 15 minutes when you've finished editing it. But this only applies if you've formatted your script correctly, which is why I say it's important to do it. So there's a lot of paid software out there for screenwriting, but there are a few solid options as well that are free. Either they are entirely free or they offer a free trial which you can use to get yourself started. So I'm going to link those in the description of this video. Now, you shouldn't really fill your script with lengthy descriptions. You've got to remember that you're not writing a novel, you're actually writing a blueprint for a movie. Similar to an architect's drawings, which are functional, but not particularly beautiful to look at. So just try to focus on exactly what the audience sees and hears. And when you format your script correctly, it should look like this. Now, once you've got your first draft, don't go rushing into fixing it right away. Yeah, just stick it in a drawer. Of course, we don't stick it in drawers anymore because it's all on a computer, but you can metaphorically put it in a drawer and then just forget about it for a few days and then come back and read it with what we call fresh eyes. Because that little bit of distance, it just makes it way easier to spot things that could work better. It can also be really helpful to show it to people who don't know the story at all. So they're just going to read it like someone is kind of watching your film for the first time. They're not going to have any preconceptions. And the thing is, because you're so close to it, they'll hopefully see stuff that you've maybe missed. So if you do this a few times, you just rewrite it, take a little bit of a break, get some feedback, and then rewrite it again until you feel that the script is as good as it can possibly be, and then you're ready to move on. Okay, now you're ready to prepare for your short film shoot. And just remember that when you're filming, you will find yourself having to think of so many things, especially if you have a small crew. So forward planning is really going to help you keep things under control. You know, on my movies, I've been the writer, director, camera operator, prop master, I've been managing the catering and just about everything else. It's basically really going to stretch you, that kind of level of multitasking. You know, for example, you'll be directing the actors, making sure each shot is framed well, lit well, exposed well, in focus, as well as you're also trying to keep track of the shots that you need, continuity between shots and scenes. And while you're doing all this, you're going to be aware that time is running out. Shooting a movie is usually quite a high pressure situation, so pre-planning is going to remove some of that pressure. And basically try to make as many decisions as you can before you start shooting. When professionals organize a movie shoot, they're going to break down the screenplay into things like individual scenes, locations, characters, as well as things like required props, and this just helps to plan things better. Another thing you should do is give each scene of your script a number. So most screenwriting software is going to be able to do this for you. And if you want to be even better prepared, then I recommend that you create a shot list for each scene. So just start by reading the scene and thinking, what shots do I want here? So for example, if scene 5 has a moment where a character says something important, maybe you want a close-up to capture their expression, or if there's a big outdoor scene, you might want a big wide shot to show the whole place. So just write down each shot and give it a number. Now, I've actually created a whole course that goes much more deeply into how you can build up a shot list, how you create a sequence. It's all about how in movies we go from one shot to the next, and it's sort of studying each movie as well as creating things like themes and color themes and all kinds of other stuff. But if you want to check out that course and improve your cinematography and just sort of learn how to think like a cinematographer, I'm going to put a link to that in the description along with everything else. So once you've worked out your shots, write down each shot and give it a number. So it's going to be like scene 5, shot 1, scene 5, shot 2, and so on. This numbering just helps you when you're communicating with your team, and also helps you to keep track of what you need during filming. So even if you're filming on your own and you don't really have much of a team, then it's still a good idea to have this list. A storyboard is basically a visual version of your shot list, and it's going to help you to plan your shoot and show other people exactly what's in your head. By sketching out your film shot by shot, you're going to save yourself loads of time, as well as avoiding confusion once you're on set. You don't have to be some skilled artist, just do your best to get the idea across. Just like simple rough sketches or even stick figures, they're fine really. And today, some storyboarding apps even have AI to help you create images automatically, or just to generate ideas based on your descriptions. And that can speed things up and give you more of a stronger sort of visual reference for when you're filming. So I haven't tried all of these myself, but I'd say they're definitely worth checking out. So you just got to make sure that your frames follow the order that you want them to appear in the film. And if you've ever read like a comic book or a graphic novel, you will already know the concept of that. So each frame is a still shot, and when you move from one frame to the next, it's just like the cut in the movie. So what you want to do is match your storyboard shot numbers to your shot list numbers. So everything then stays organized. And you can also jot down what's happening or any dialogue under each frame. So you just start with your first scene and then just try to picture it playing out like a movie. See if you can imagine it, the shots from one to the next. And if you do find yourself stuck and you can't really think, you're not sure what to do, then just watch some films, see how the pros build these scenes shot by shot, and take some notes, and then you can use that as inspiration. So scheduling is really a big part of the pre-planning process. So it's just going to tell everyone where to be, when they need to be there, and for how long. Plus, of course, there will be details about costumes and props, so everybody knows what to bring. Now, when you make your schedule, you're trying to figure out how long each scene is going to take to shoot. So if you've never filmed before, this can be a little bit tricky to guess. Of course, how long a scene takes depends on its length in pages, or parts of pages, but also how complicated it is to film. So you might have a scene with lots of choreography, like action or special effects, and that's definitely going to slow things down. So for example, in our second short film, which is called Regen, we did have quite a few makeup and blood effects, so I made sure to build in extra time into the schedule for those scenes. But just to give you a rough idea, so if it's a professional production, they usually aim for about 2 pages of script per day. But personally, I try to hit about 5 pages a day when I can, just because it's going to save money to do it quicker. Now, can you make a short film with nothing but a smartphone and no extra gear? Well, the short answer is yes, you can. You can shoot and edit the whole thing on your phone, especially if you use like a top-level video editing app, like, for example, LumaFusion, which I think is the standout app for editing on your phone if you're doing a short film. So here's what we used for our 5 shorts. We didn't use all the same equipment for each one, but over the course of making those 5 shorts, we used a smartphone for the camera, we used a smartphone gimbal, we used an anamorphic adapter, we used a boom mic, we also used wireless mics for one episode, we used a tripod, we used a cage, and we also used some small LED lights. So our short films were shot quite a few years ago, kind of at the beginning of this smartphone videography revolution. But since then, there's been quite a lot of smartphone filmmaking gear has come onto the market. But you do have to make sure that you're not suffering from gas. So I'm not talking about digestion issues, I'm talking about gear acquisition syndrome. And, every filmmaker knows this syndrome pretty well, I think. And it's just that constant itch that you've got to buy the latest gear because it feels exciting, even if it doesn't really help your actual creativity. A lot of the time, we think new gear is going to magically make our work better. But the real danger is that you can overcomplicate things when you're filming. And too much tech can actually slow you down on set, especially if you're making a movie without any money. Suddenly you've got all this gear to think about, and you've got to set it up, and you've got to manage it, and then, you end up spending all your time making the kit work when you should actually be thinking about the creative stuff. I promise you, there's nothing that kills a film shoot faster than everybody standing around while the director tries to get the camera gear to work. And so, that sequence that I showed you earlier by the river, I was just using the iPhone 17 Pro, entirely handheld. I didn't have any other equipment, and I was just using the regular iPhone camera app. I've got a video on Patreon where I actually talk about how we did that. So again, you can check that out. I'll put the link in the description. But all that said, there is some essential gear that, for example, if you want to record dialogue, probably going to need an extra microphone, some kind of external mic. So I'm going to link to all my recommended smartphone shooting gear in the description. So on a professional movie set, there's a pretty standard routine that everybody follows for each take. And actually a lot of this comes from shooting on film back in the day, but it does actually help the crew to stay organized and work efficiently. And one of the classic tools that you're going to see is the clapperboard.
Camera speed, unmark it.
And its main job is just to help sync up your audio and video. So someone holds it up with the scene and take info written onto it, and they call out the numbers and then clap it shut. And that clap sound creates a spike in the audio waveform, and then the editor can line that up with the visual clap of the clapperboard, and they can use that to sync the audio and the image. The thing is that nowadays, with editing software like Final Cut Pro and Premiere and DaVinci Resolve, syncing audio can actually be done automatically. So that actually means that we can do without the clapperboard. So you might want to, just for caution's sake, in case the sync doesn't work, what I do is I just ask someone to clap their hands or snap their fingers in frame. And that's going to create a sync point, and also you can get them to call out the scene number. It's pretty simple and it works fine, and it just saves you carrying around this extra thing and slowing down your shot by, oh, where's the clapperboard? You know, that kind of stuff. If you're working with a crew, there's also something called a roll call sequence.
Scene 1, take 2, take 2.
So this usually goes something like roll sound to start the audio, and then speed, and that means that the recorder is up to speed, and then roll camera to say the camera's recording, followed by mark it for the clapperboard, and then finally the good old director saying action for the actors to start. So that's kind of like the old school way of doing it, and there's no rule here, just use whatever system works for you. You don't need to use all those steps, obviously it just depends what equipment you're using and how many crew you have. If you're filming solo or with a small team, you can just keep it simple. If you're recording audio directly to the camera, you don't need to say roll sound, obviously. And if you're doing everything yourself, then you just have to hit the record button and say action when you're ready to go. Coverage is basically all the different shots that you need to cover a scene fully. And this is going to provide the editor all the required angles. So this means capturing the action from various distances and different viewpoints, you know, like wide shots, close-ups, over-the-shoulder shots, and things like reaction shots. And this way you can cut between the shots to keep the scene visually interesting, and you can even fix mistakes, you can highlight emotions, and you're basically just shaping the story's rhythm. So good coverage means that you've got everything that you need to build the best final scene possible. And as well, getting this right is going to help you to change the pacing if you need to, and to focus on different characters and things like fixed continuity errors. So choosing shots is a creative process, and again, there's no real rules telling you the shots that you have to have. There's even been some movies which have been filmed in one long shot, or maybe just like a handful of very long takes. But most movies use multiple angles for every scene, unless it's a very short scene. So it's usually a good idea to have a master shot. So this shot is going to cover the entire scene and all the action that takes place in that scene, and it's probably, you know, from a wide angle so that you can get everything in. Or you can, you know, move the camera to make sure you've got it all in. And knowing you have this master shot, it just means that you're always going to have every part of the scene covered in at least one shot. So it's, you know, good security. A wide shot is just going to give your audience a wider perspective, obviously. Many tutorials actually suggest that you should start your scene with a wide shot, but I wouldn't take that as good advice necessarily, because your shot order should really be determined by your story. You know, great storytelling is all about revealing information bit by bit, whereas starting with a wide shot basically reveals everything immediately. So depending on how you want to tell your story, in some ways, starting with a wide shot is kind of like the equivalent of revealing the end of the movie at the beginning, and it's going to leave your audience with no reason to keep watching. So why not start with a close-up, and then later go wider to reveal more about what's going on? We might start with a close-up of a key in the lock and then cut to a wider shot of a person going through the front door, for example. So a medium shot is going to frame your characters from about the waist up. So this is good for showing people talking or reacting, and we might think of this as like the classic dialogue shot, and because you can see both faces and you can also see some of what they're doing. Now, close-up gets right in on someone's face or a key object or some kind of action, and you can use this for showing emotions, or you can show important reactions, or you want to show something that the audience really needs to know to follow the story. And close-ups are really key shots for revealing information to the audience. So these are like the 3 basic shots in movie making, but there's obviously many more. You know, we've got things like extreme close-up, over-the-shoulder shot, we've got a 2-shot, point-of-view shot, tracking shot, dolly shot, crane shot, low-angle shot, high-angle shot, we've got Dutch angle tilt, establishing shot, reaction shot, insert shot, cutaway shot, pan, tilt, zoom, handheld shot, steadicam shot, aerial shots, we've got overhead shots, we've got a rack focus, a static shot, we've got a long take, or we've got maybe a tracking shot, and that's not even the full list. That's just a few. But don't worry about learning these kind of shots like it's some kind of movie making test where you've got to memorize them all. The best thing to do is just watch movies and just get inspired by the shots that you see, and then just choose the shots that are going to work for your story. Now, when you're filming a dialogue scene, there are 3 basic shots that you want to think about capturing to get good coverage. So we've got the 2 shot, which you could think of as a master shot. And this is a wider shot that's going to show both actors in the frame, and it's usually going to be from the side or a slight angle. So when we say it's a master shot, it just means, like I say, it covers everything from start to finish as the actors go through their lines. So the good thing about shooting this full master shot first is it gives your actors a chance to settle in and kind of find their rhythm before you switch to the close-up shots or the over-the-shoulder shots. After you've got this master shot, you're going to want to shoot over-the-shoulder close-ups of each actor. And this involves framing one actor's face by shooting just over the shoulder of the scene partner. And these shots are classic because they pull the audience into the conversation and actually make the audience feel part of it. And these over-the-shoulder shots also let you capture the actor's emotions and the reactions nice and close up. And that's where a lot of the subtle storytelling actually happens. So technically we call it over the shoulder and reverse over the shoulder, which is going to be from the other actor's side. By cutting back and forth between these 2 angles, you're going to create this natural rhythm, and it feels conversational and hopefully immersive. So if you filmed one actor from over the shoulder and the other from a side angle, it can sort of feel visually odd or a little bit jarring when you come to edit it. So if you stick to these kind of classic over the shoulder and the reverse over the shoulder, it makes the scene kind of flow smoothly and it keeps the viewers engaged. But of course you might want to make the scene feel jarring, in which case you can actually do this deliberately. So one tip is just to keep your blocking simple, because if you have too much movement, it can mess with the focus and the framing and the sound, just makes it more complicated. So keep actors telling the story mostly from steady, well-planned shots. Now when you plan your coverage, besides these kind of main shots, try to get a few reaction close-ups or cutaways just to add flavour, and also it's going to help when you're editing to give you somewhere to edit to, which means that you can adjust the pacing. One of the biggest differences between a pro shoot and a no-budget shoot is lighting. Even if you're filming outside in daylight, professional sets usually have ways to control or to shape that light to get the exact look that they want. But you actually can get great results with just a little know-how and almost no budget. First off, just try to use the existing light around you as much as possible. So on a night shoot, for example, instead of setting up big lamps, you can have your actors stand near a well-lit window or under a street lamp, for example. Just try to find the source of light and then set your scene close by, because sometimes that's all you need really to get a nice kind of moody look. When you're shooting indoors during the day, get your actors sitting or standing sideways by a big window. Daylight is nice and soft when it's filtered through curtains or even clouds, and best of all, it's free. So to reduce the amount of light and to make the light less harsh, we can use, for example, a white curtain or a bed sheet even as a diffuser. So normally you wouldn't want to put your actor with their back to the window because their face is just going to be shadowy. Unless, of course, a shadowy face is going to work for the story. So this is actually a photo from the shoot of my sci-fi series, Cosmos. And we're setting up a dialogue scene here with the DOP. And this is between Virginia Fay and Terry Malloy. And we're using the natural daylight from the window. As you can see, there's no bright direct sunlight coming through the window. So the light is already pretty diffused. And there's a little trick here that you can see, if you noticed it. There's this white cloth that the DOP placed over Virginia. And this is to reflect the extra light onto Terry, because only Virginia's shoulder and the side of her head actually appear in this shot. So the white cloth isn't going to be seen, and it's just going to add some extra lighting without having to add artificial lights. So if you do bring in any kind of artificial lights, just bear in mind that kind of bare bulbs tend to create sharp, harsh shadows, and they're not particularly flattering, and they don't look particularly cinematic either. And that's why pros use soft boxes or diffusers to create a softer look. And this is going to make people look nicer on camera, and it's going to make your images look more cinematic. And also, it's less challenging for your camera's sensor. One low-budget trick is actually to put a light inside an inexpensive paper Chinese lantern. Another easy and cheap diffusing method is to tape a translucent shower curtain or tracing paper in front of your light source. Just be aware that light sources can be very hot, so anything that's going to melt or set on fire, just be really careful of that. But you can also think about bouncing light instead of shining a light directly into a face. You can just aim it at a wall or the ceiling or a big piece of foam board, and the light's going to bounce back gently, and it's going to fill the shadows, and it's going to create a softer look as well. But don't forget about the practical, what we call practical lights in your set as well. So these are things that are actually in the frame, things like lamps or string lights, computer screens. Candles can add warmth or texture, and all these things will bring your scene to life. If you look at a lot of movies, sometimes the lighting doesn't make logical sense because it's the middle of the day and it's should be perfectly lit, and yet you'll see that all the lamps are on, and it's like, why are they on? They don't actually need them on, but it's because it looks good for filming. So you can make your scene come more alive by adding some nice practical lights actually within the frame. So lastly, pay attention to the contrast and the shadows. Sometimes a little shadow on the face adds mystery or mood. But you can experiment by placing light sources at different angles. You can also try side lighting and backlighting, or even underlighting to give your film more visual character. Cinematography isn't just about creating one nice shot, like when you're taking a photograph. Because, a photograph works on its own. You can create a beautiful photo, you can put it in a frame, and then you can hang it on your wall. With cinematography, you're taking 24 photos every second, and each photo has to make sense in a sequence with thousands of other photos. And this is exactly what I talk about in my cinematography course on Patreon. One of the most important aspects of cinematography is lighting. Because as a painter paints with paint, cinematographers paint with light. Soft light and low-key, moody light often looks more cinematic than bright light. One of the biggest challenges for shooting cinematic-looking video is controlling the light. And actually, too much light is often harder to deal with than when you don't have enough light. You might have noticed that in movies, interior scenes are quite often filmed with the curtains closed, even if it's a daytime scene. This helps us to control the lighting inside a set and to block out unwanted daylight, and that way we can maintain consistency across takes as well as scenes. By removing natural light, cinematographers can use artificial lights to shape the mood, the exposure, and the style exactly as they intended, without this kind of unpredictability of the sun, which can go in and out behind clouds, or it can, when it goes down at night, then you lose your lighting. In this scene from Cosmos, even though we actually had daylight that was coming through the window, our DOP set up lights which mimicked the daylight coming through the window, so that way he could have complete control and we didn't have to worry about it getting dark. So if you haven't got the time or the money for all these artificial lights, because obviously it does take time to set them up and get them right, to create the mood that you're looking for, that cinematic look, try to find locations that actually provide this indirect, diffused lighting conditions, and then look for the best areas in this location to place your actors. Aside from working with light, cinematographers often use lenses, specific types of lenses, to add character to their footage. You can use mist filters to soften the image, reduce contrast, as well as adding atmospheric blooms around windows and lighting. And filmmakers often use haze machines or atmospheric aerosol for interior scenes. And this is to create a sort of visible mist within the room. So if you use this in a kind of subtle way, the fine particles that you spray around catch the light, and it just adds this mood and kind of extra depth to the scene. If you're working in a small area, like a small set, you can get haze in a can, and then you can just spray it around the room before each take. So it's not too expensive, like maybe $20 a can. And bear in mind it's going to slow you down a little bit, because for each take you're going to have to re-spray it around a bit, because it does dissipate pretty quickly. But it might be worth it just to get that extra cinematic quality. So there's another technique which is called dirtying up the frame. And what this means is just basically to include things in the foreground. So this just adds depth and a sort of sense of realism, and it allows the audience to feel like they're kind of peering into a real environment rather than, a sort of contrived movie set. Another thing that you can think about is using handheld camera work to add authenticity. So whether it's kind of wild, shaky action scenes that you get in things like the Bourne films, or more controlled, subtle movement that you get in a film like The Revenant, handheld shots bring a kind of human feel to the footage. So when you're shooting a handheld shot with your smartphone, don't just hold and stand there. You've got to try to gently move your body to add a sort of purposeful motion. And this is going to make your shots breathe. Now if you pair this movement with some foreground elements, you're going to get this beautiful sense of depth and extra sort of life in the frame. Gimbals are really great for capturing smooth, cinematic moving shots. Things like tracking or dollying in on an actor, and you can even do crane-style shots. And there's loads of other types of shots too. And if you are filming with a smartphone and you want a gimbal, then I recommend the Hohem iSteady M7. And if you decide to use a gimbal, only use it for specific shots. A lot of beginners buy the gimbal and then they just assume that the smartphone has to stay fixed on the gimbal whenever they're capturing video. But if you keep the phone on the gimbal, it's going to slow you down and it's going to make your shots too similar. And as well, it's going to make shots more complicated than they need to be. With a gimbal, you need to worry about what mode it's in. Is it functioning correctly? Is the battery about to run out? And all this kind of stuff. So just don't use it unless you really need it for a particular shot. So while it's great to have a gimbal as part of your smartphone filmmaker toolkit, I really don't recommend that you use it for every shot. There's an old low-budget filmmaker proverb which says, an audience will put up with low-quality images but not low-quality sound. I actually don't think it's true now as much as it used to be, because these days audiences are so used to high-quality images that they've kind of come to expect them. Bad audio can still ruin a beautiful-looking movie, so it really is of equal importance as the visual side. High-quality sound and music can also raise the dynamism of your images. Just think of all the great movies that had memorable soundtracks. If you're going to record your actors' voices, then you will need some kind of audio setup. So this can be as simple as a $20 wired lavalier mic plugged directly into your smartphone. But on the other hand, you do get what you pay for when it comes to audio equipment. So just be aware that the cheap mics don't sound the best. So there's two main types of microphone used to record dialogue. There's a shotgun mic and there's a lavalier or clip-on mic, like this one. So a shotgun mic is known as a directional microphone. It's long and it's thin and it aims to record audio only from the direction it is pointed, which then minimizes the background noise. So this is going to be usually mounted on a boom, which is a pole, and that's held by a person who's known as the boom op. Or boom operator. If you don't have someone to hold the boom, you'll probably be better off looking at clip-on mics instead. So a lavalier or a clip-on mic is known as an omnidirectional microphone. And that means that it records audio from all directions. And the way this type of mic minimizes background noise is simply by being as close to the actor's mouth as possible. So directing actors is one of the biggest challenges for any new director. And many of us feel more at home kind of fiddling with the camera settings than figuring out how to help an actor deliver those big emotions. But the truth is, your actors' performances are probably the most important aspect of your short film. Just think about it. Would you rather watch a great play by Shakespeare, filmed by a professional crew, but acted badly? Or would you rather watch Anthony Hopkins reading the back of a cereal packet filmed on his phone?
Obviously, you're a fantastic actor, but I'm focused on the eyes. You have the ability to portray madness with just the eyes alone.
Let's be honest, it's probably Hopkins on the phone every time. You know, he'd only really choose to watch the bad acting if it was so terribly bad it's actually entertaining.
You are tearing me apart!
You know, really get to know your story and the characters, because your actors will often ask you what drives their characters' actions. And this is where character consistency really matters. What you shouldn't do is tell your actors exactly how to act. Don't say, be angry or look happy. As well, saying things like, be more natural, usually just leaves an actor kind of confused. It's a bit like showing your video to someone for feedback and then they just say, it sucks. You know, it's not really constructive. So instead, explore what the character is feeling and why, so that your actor can connect emotionally to the moment. Try suggesting an action verb. Say things like, doubt what he's saying or confront him. And these instructions give the actors a goal instead of some kind of abstract emotion like be angry. And if you feel like you need something different, it's not quite working, don't just say that was bad. Try, let's do one where you really question him, or let's see what happens if you try this. And this avoids judging the actor's performance and it focuses on improving the scene. You know, it's much more constructive. So there's this saying that acting is reacting. And what that means is that acting isn't just about delivering lines or showing big emotions on your own. It's about how a character responds to what's happening around them, especially to other actors. So in a scene, an actor's job is to listen closely and genuinely react to what the other person is doing or saying. And those little reactions bring depth and they bring truth to the moment. Without reacting honestly, performances can feel stiff or staged because it's missing the kind of give and take of real human interaction. So if an actor says something emotional and the other actor responds with a kind of blank look, it makes it harder for the first actor to immerse themselves in the scene. For example, the other actor might just be trying to remember their next line, so they're not really listening. So for that reason, encourage them not to do that and, hopefully encourage them to learn their lines. So while trained actors will usually know how to work together to craft a scene into something, realistic or emotional, untrained actors are more likely to need a bit of help. And that's because we need to let go of these kind of social barriers that we all learn to hide behind. And it can be difficult for people who aren't used to performing. So acting schools use exercises, and these involve doing kind of ridiculous, silly, or exaggerated actions. And this helps the students to break down feelings of embarrassment and social awkwardness. And there's things like doing silly walks or making weird noises. But apart from that, you could try improvisation games. And you can also try to get your cast to express emotions in an exaggerated way, just to kind of get warmed up. And then when you go to the actual filming, then you go to a more subdued way of acting or a more subtle way. It's just to break down those barriers, essentially. Editing is obviously a huge subject. And you should be in no doubt that it's a vitally important part of the creative process. Because, while the script and the shoot are both crucial stages, you never quite know what you have until you start editing. A short film can be reshaped or even transformed in the edit. And many films have been ruined in the edit, and there have been great battles over who gets to do the editing and whether the studio has the final say or the director, which is why we have these director's edits coming out. In a sense, the editing phase is the moment that you are truly making your film. Video clips and sound files, music, and sound effects are your raw materials. And now you have to fashion them into something powerful. Editing a short film scene by scene is all about breaking down your story into manageable chunks and then shaping each part so that it flows naturally into the next. For each scene, I like to start with the best master shot, the wide angle that covers everything happening in the scene, and then think of it as your scene's backbone or skeleton. And it gives you a solid structure which you can then build on, and it's also something to fall back on if your closer shots don't quite work out in the edit. From there, it's all about the craft of storytelling and how you want to reveal information, because how and when you reveal information is absolutely the core skill of any storytelling process. So when do you want to cut to a close-up, for example? Maybe on the first line of dialogue to capture the actor's emotions, or maybe you keep the wider shot longer to let the scene breathe. Every cut that you make is a creative decision that can totally change the pace and the impact of your story. Like I say, storytelling is all about reveals, so ask yourself, what does this shot reveal that is new to the audience? And the key word is new. If there's nothing new, then don't use it. For every shot, there must be something new to keep the story moving forward, even if it's just a new angle, a line of fresh dialogue, or a new reaction from the actor. So you can edit directly on your phone using an app like LumaFusion, and that pretty much covers all the bases for video editing. But if you find it too small and fiddly, you can even connect your smartphone to a keyboard, mouse, and a monitor to create a kind of low-budget editing machine. If you want more screen space, which most people do, then you can edit on a tablet, like an iPad. Personally, I've edited all my movies on either a desktop or a laptop. For free editing software, by far the best is DaVinci Resolve. The free version does have restrictions, but it's still very powerful. Color grading usually happens after picture lock. First, get your edit nailed down, and then move on to color adjustments and any video effects. So this is going to save you time, because if you need to change the edit, then the video effects and the color work are probably going to need to be redone. So don't waste your time doing video effects or color work on shots that you end up not using. A professional colorist actually does two separate jobs. They do color correction and color grading. So color correction is about fixing your footage to make it look natural and balanced, and making sure the colors sit correctly in the chosen color space. Color grading is the creative bit, and this is where you make deliberate stylistic choices to set the mood, the tone, or even the visual style of your film. Working on the color of your film isn't just about making it look more cinematic. It's also about creating a mood and tying each shot and scene together for a kind of unified look. If you watch any professionally made movie, you should see a consistent look throughout the film. If you use it skillfully, color is a really powerful storytelling tool that's going to shape the mood, and it highlights themes and guides the audience's emotions without a single word being spoken. Every great film uses deliberate color schemes to create a consistent visual language, and that sets the tone scene by scene, even shot by shot. And these themes also tie your shots, scenes, and sequences together. And as well, you can use color to signify changes in the mood of the film and to delineate between different sections. One obvious example is the use of color for present-day sequences, and then a kind of faded, desaturated colors for flashbacks. So, no matter if you shot your film in Apple Log or a natural profile, if you recorded with common codecs like H.264 or H.265, these are compressed formats and they throw away a lot of color information. So that means that you need to be careful with how far you push corrections and grading. So if you just use little subtle tweaks and just try to keep the look consistent, then you're gonna keep things more cinematic, and you're gonna avoid things like banding and artifacts as much as possible. But if you record it in 10-bit color at a high bit rate, you've got much more data to work with. So this is gonna give you more flexibility when you're color grading. The top choice for smartphone footage when it comes to color work is definitely 10-bit ProRes Apple Log. And more recently, we've got Apple ProRes RAW. So this format retains the most image information and it gives you room to shape your grade professionally without the image breaking. So you're not going to get those things like banding and artifacts so much. So lock your picture first and then treat color correction and grading as separate stages. And just try to work carefully within your footage's codec limitations. And you're going to get the best cinematic results. Music is such a powerful tool and it can really enhance the emotional impact as well as the atmosphere of your short film. That said, it really needs to be used thoughtfully as well as sparingly, because less is often more. I think sometimes we kind of lose confidence in our film and then we feel like we need to kind of punch it up with some loud music, too dramatic, and it's too overbearing. So just be careful what kind of music you use. Try to be subtle with it. Unless, of course, it really demands something sort of over the top and dramatic. The choice of music should always serve the story, reinforcing the mood and supporting the drama that's already there in the scenes. As well, consistency in the music style throughout your film is just going to tie the drama together, and it just helps to make each scene feel like they all belong in the same movie. Just like with color grading, the music helps to tie all your shots and sequences together. So don't go from a low, rumbling, unsettling score in one scene to some kind of comical piano melody in the next, unless you have a solid creative reason for doing it. You can also use music to build the tension as the movie progresses. Just be really careful with the music that you use for your short. I'm a festival director and I've watched many short films, and I've seen the clumsy use of music really spoil something that otherwise, might have been selected. So this is quite a long video, but really we've only kind of scratched the surface. There's obviously a ton more to find out and learn, which is why I wrote this book. I put everything that I could think of about how to make a short film with a smartphone, and it's a pretty thick book, this one, and it's got color pictures as well. So I go through everything in much more detail than I can go into here, and it's out now on Amazon if you want to pick it up. And also, like I say, there's tons of stuff on the Patreon. You can learn how to construct sequences, cinematic sequences that are going to make sense in a story and engage your audience. Plus, you can just chat to me if you have any particular questions about how to write a story, or how to shoot a particular shot, or how to work with a particular actor, or develop a certain character. You can always chat to me there, and I'm always there sort of pretty much 7 days a week. So I'll see you there. Otherwise, I'll see you in the next video.